Island. If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. Right. Everybody signed the register? Declarations of interest? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't anticipate there will be any declarations, bearing in mind the committee and the matter under consideration by the committee, as it's a wellbeing plan which relates to not just the full Torfaen area, but in fact the wider Gwent area. So I haven't heard of members if they have any questions, but I don't anticipate any declarations, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair, just to note the apologies of Councillor Rose Seaborn, please.
Apologies from Councillor Seaborn. Anyone else? We now go on to the draft regional area plan. Good morning, welcome to the meeting. Would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Morning, my name is Jill Pratlett. I'm Head of Adult Services in Torfaen.
Phil Diamond, Regional Partnership Board Coordinator.
Thank you very much. Would you like to give us a draft?
Okay, good morning everybody. It was about a year ago that I first came to the scrutiny meeting to present the draft population needs assessment, the document in front of you. And the PNA is a statutory requirement placed on the 5 local authorities and the Health Board. It sets out the needs of the health and wellbeing needs for the population of Gwent, and that had to be completed by the 1st of April in 2018. So part of the statutory consultation was to bring it through to scrutiny in full council and to sign it off. Following the PNA, there's a statutory requirement to produce an action plan, an area plan, which sets out how we will take the words, or how, if I can just grab this copy, sorry, how we turn the words in this PNA into action. So what we're presenting to you today is the draft area plan. And it's been developed by strategic partnership boards. So, for instance, you'll notice that there's a carer section, and that's been prescribed by Welsh Government. The core themes, older people, children, young people, learning disabilities, mental health, all been prescribed by Welsh Government. And one of the sections is on carers. Well, in terms of how we've developed that section, I've linked into the Carers Board, because around the Carers Board, you have the Health Board represented, the local authority, social services, third sector, but actual carers themselves. And that's the approach we've taken for all the sections within the area plan. The Older People's Board, we've had a link to the Adult Strategic Partnership Board. Children's section has been developed by the Children and Families Board. So just for you to have, I suppose, an appreciation that the actions that are included in there haven't just been written by myself or an officer in a small dark room, etc. So it is sort of our intention that it is widely accepted. That said, in terms of the area plan, there are still some gaps. This is a draft, and it will have to be signed off and put onto the local authority websites by the 1st of April this year. There are some gaps, for instance, around the Integrated Care funded projects. Now, the Integrated Care Fund is a £10 million pot of money that's presented to the region, and there will be a number of projects. So, for instance, social prescribing and community connectors has previously been funded through the ICF, as well as a number of different initiatives to reduce the number of delays within hospitals, but also working with children and young people with complex needs. The bids this year have been discussed this afternoon, so I can't obviously put them into the area plan until it's been decided which projects go forward. So again, just to give you an appreciation within the area plan that there might be some gaps. It's a working draft. However, what was really useful this time last year when I came and talked about the PNA is that the comments that you provided I was able to put into the PNA, and it's a lot stronger document for the comments. I'll give you an example. Previously at the Scrutiny Committee we talked about older people's needs. Well, there was a real concern amongst this Scrutiny Committee around loneliness and isolation, so I was able to pick that up as a need and highlight and emphasise it. So when you look at the PNA for older people, you'll see that there's an emphasis on social isolation, and the same with other comments around emotional well-being. So, you know, I guess from my point of view, it would be great to receive some comments from you today, because the area plan, in terms of it being effective, will need to sort of hit all areas of health and well-being, and the only way we can do that is by scrutinising it and making sure that there's no gaps. Okay.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us how the recommendations previously made by this committee and other consultation responses have been used to shape this action plan?
Okay, well, I suppose the obvious one was what I've just mentioned, the social isolation. I haven't got a copy of the previous draft of the PNA, but if I did, I'd bring it and I should be able to show to you that the previous PNA didn't have the emphasis there. So social isolation and loneliness was highlighted. And what we've been able to sort of pick up on there is schemes such as Befriending and Friend of Me scheme as well, run by the Health Board, and to give that some real emphasis. There was also some comments around complex needs of children and looked after children, and we've been able to put an emphasis on that. Is that okay? It's just to give you a flavour. I haven't got the complete list, but I could probably come back to you if you needed to know the full list of recommendations, how they've been incorporated.
One other point, Chair, is that obviously through the PNA, but particularly now around the area plan, whilst the plans have been kind of drafted and developed through the boards, they have gone wider and engaged, as you can see under 7.2, with older people's forums and the youth forums. So certainly the consultation and the feedback has been from a wide range of people, not just the professionals, and I think that's really important to point to note.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Phil, for that information. And as you pointed out, there is more discussion to take place to come forward. Can you tell us how the progress against the action plan can be reported, and to who? For example, will citizens be included in that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, and something that we have thought about. In terms of the area plan, it is the responsibility of the Regional Partnership Board to sort of deliver and to monitor. Statutory requirement will be to produce an annual report linked into the area plan to demonstrate progress and also where challenges have been faced. However, as a Regional Partnership Board, we're not going to wait till once a year to report progress. So each of the strategic partnerships I've mentioned, the Children and Families Board, the Carers Board, Adults Partnership, Mental Health and Learning Disability Committee, and there's the Health, Housing, Social Care. Each of those 5 partnerships will be required to report against that area plan throughout the year. So we have to work out how that will work, because having each of those 5 partnerships bring in a report to every meeting might be difficult to manage. So what we may have to do is stagger throughout the year. The partnership board meets 6 times a year. So what we may have is, for the first meeting there'll be an update on the Children and Families Board section. On the second meeting it'll be an update on the Adults Partnership. So when we produce those reports, we'll be in a position to share those reports as well. You know, there will be public documents. So at any time we could look to bring an update report back to the Scrutiny Committee. However, in the very least, we could look to bring back the annual report this time next year to hopefully demonstrate progress and challenges.
Chief, could I ask a supplementary, please? Thanks for that, Phil. Yeah, and I know that information will be coming back to us and coming back to the board. But as Jill pointed out earlier, we've met with forums and voluntary groups such as those. Will you be reporting back to them on your progress?
Apologies, I didn't pick up that point to the question. Yes, definitely. We have a citizens panel here in the Gwent region that we will link into, and we'll also obviously have good relationships with the different groups. For instance, when I went along and presented the PNA to the different groups, there was a group of parents with disabled children. I made the sort of promise to sort of say, well, look, here's the PNA, thank you for your comments, I will come back and present the area plan. And that's what I'm doing at the moment, is going back and revisiting some of those groups. Some of them will involve the 50 plus forums over in Widdershins as well. But I was asked a question, you know, how do you demonstrate engagement, etc., within the period of time? Well, my approach really is to think about engagement as continuous. You know, it shouldn't be confined to a window of time. And in terms of those reports that go back to the Regional Partnership Board, I think every one of those reports should have a section to say that this report has been considered by a relevant citizen group. So, for instance, if the carers board is reporting up progress, really that should have gone through a carers group to make them to find out if they are happy with challenges. So it's relatively new, and I know when we present reports, whether it's a council report, you almost have that appendix, don't you? Has it considered the principles of the well-being of future generations, act sustainability, financial? Well, I think in terms of the way we report, there should be a section. Have we considered the views of citizens when we've presented this report? So it's relatively new, and I think it will involve a little bit of work, but in order to get this right, yeah, every single thing we should do, you know, should have that consideration.
Can I just add, I think it's really important that when we are reporting, what we as officers report, actually that rings true with the citizen, and I think really that is the challenge. So when we're going back to the forums and saying this is what we see as progress, it's really important to say, actually, do you agree with this? Is that what it feels like on the ground? Because that's the balance, isn't it? We might have a view as officers, but we have to ensure that our view is actually shared with the citizen, and when we get that feedback.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Phil. I'm encouraged to hear that response that you've just given. And obviously, when you say about Widdershins, there are other community forums as well. They all meet at Widdershins today, or do they go to different forums?
Yes. Yeah, there's different forums. I think there's 450 plus forums within Torfaen, and I was lucky to go to each 4 of those forums when I presented the PNA, and also delivered Dementia Friends sessions as well. So, you know, there's some good links. But this is something I've thought about in myself, and I've sort of presented it to colleagues. But what's really useful is that you've raised it formally now, so I can take it back and look to implement this as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Phil. Joe?
Morning.
Morning.
You said it's a draft, so when I read the action plan, it's not clear to me what services will be delivered or how services will be delivered differently when you go back and work on the draft. Is that something you'll be putting more detail in?
Yes, definitely. I mentioned the ICF fund that is being discussed this afternoon. It's a £10 million pot of money, and it's a considerable lever for change within health and social care. And after today's meeting, I would like to be in a position where I can now go back into area plan and set out those different programmes. And I've mentioned some already: social prescribers, community connectors, programmes you're probably familiar with. But there'll be some new programmes in there as well. There's a bid put forward around looked after children. As you're probably aware, there's a number of looked after children placed out of the county, and it's a considerable cost to local authorities. However, more importantly, we're not sure that that's the best we have the best outcomes when children are placed out of the county. So there's a new bid coming in to look at how we build internal provision across Gwent instead of paying those placements, which could be sometimes £2,000 to £5,000 a week. So that hopefully will be accepted, and that will be a feature of the area plan going forward.
Thank you. Sue?
Can I just, I know you mentioned services then, but I think this is also about an approach. So it is not just about services, it's about information and advice. It's about engaging the citizen and the communities. It's about a whole ethos of it, probably a different approach. So services may be part of that, but it won't be necessarily services. It's about how can we, for these priorities, how can we ensure that that we are operating and ensure that the advice and information is available and up to date for the citizen as well.
Yeah, thank you. Joe, do you want to come back in? No. Sue Walton?
When we're saying that we are looking at prioritising the children that we have to place out of the county, have we got a time period on this for the children not to be taken out of the county and into Torvine?
The bid itself is working across the spectrum. I suppose, the end result, unfortunately, when things become, catastrophic for families, is sometimes children are placed out of the county. However, in order to reduce that, we need to be looking at interventions, at different points before those crises. So in terms of the bid that's put forward, it's actually looking at working with families in crisis at a lot earlier opportunity to stop it getting to that point where the only solution is to place a child out of the county. So, for instance, there will be therapeutic resources. There will be look about early intervention and support and identifying families. So, yes, it's not just about the fact that children placed out of the county. It's how we're working further upstream prior to that to even reduce the need for pupils to be placed out of the county.
Can I just say there is a stream of work in Torvine looking at the LAC population. We've been working with IPC, which is a consultancy, developing our own preventative strategy, looking at the analysis of how those children have come to be looked after, and looking at how we, as Phil says, how we can look at preventative services down the line that may have helped prevent that person coming into care. So, but that's a local piece of work in Torvine that the Children's Services Department are doing with IPC. I have to say, apologies, I don't have all the details to hand, as it's not my particular area, but if there is any additional information, I'm sure my colleague Jason O'Brien has been in post for all of a week now, will be able to answer all your questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill. Fee?
I was just wondering, taking that a little bit further, there's some great work going on in Torvine with things like the MIST project, which are helping looked after children a lot and helping carers. Will that sort of be spread to other authorities, and will that be built in some way, the good work, the thoughts about it, into the plan?
You've taken the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say that. The MIST project has been highlighted as good practice across Gwent. The bid that's been put forward for the ICF is a regional bid, so obviously the 5 local authorities and the health board. Within that bid, there is there's a sort of recognition of some good work that's already taken place, and the MIST project is one of those. I sat in with the consultants IPC who put the bid together, and they mentioned it in person that we're building on some good foundations here with projects like the MIST. So yes, the bid that's going forward this afternoon is actually a complementary and almost an extension of the MIST model, but across the region.
Well, that's excellent.
It is good for Torvine. It's been well recognised.
Councillor Stewart-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the out of children, out of county, I welcome those figures. If you could give us some, Jill, the new gentleman who's in post. The thing I want to ask you, Phil, you mentioned the £10 million that will be coming forward, and obviously that's going to be shared amongst the 5 authorities. Could you give us at this early stage some idea what that will mean to Torvine? And the other point I wanted to make is it is very costly to place people out of county, but there's the emotional strain as well on the parents who have to visit people who are out of county as well. So we need to take that on board.
Yeah. Can I just pick up first of all on the adult services interventions through the Intermediate Care Fund, and maybe Phil, you can expand on the children's. The Intermediate Care Fund has been in place for a number of years, and we have been making use of that in Torvine, particularly in adult services. And I think something that you know, Councillor Evans, quite a bit about is the North Torvine team, and we actually accessed funding from the intermediate care scheme to get that up and running to fund that team, and we have still got funding for the next financial year for that team. We fund step up, step down beds to help facilitate hospital discharge or to stop admissions is another area, and we have funding for the community connectors in Torvine from that fund. So from an adult services perspective, so we have certainly benefited over the last few years, and we have continued commitment now for the next financial year. With the Intermediate Care Fund, it is not a stream of funding that is ongoing. So we know that we, through the Welsh Government guidelines, that we can only extend those funding streams till the end of next year, with the expectation that we start to embed some of those schemes through our existing funding, which will be an extreme challenge across all local authorities and the Health Board. But from the children's services, sorry, is there any further questions on adults before?
Well, I realise and concur with you that there is good work going on in the North adult teams as well, as you said, Jill. But what I was trying to tease out was how much of the £10 million that Phil is talking about are we allocated in Torvine. But thank you for that, Jill, much appreciated.
The meeting that's taking place this afternoon, which will set out the allocations, is attended by the 5 local authorities, normally the directors and senior representatives for the health boards. I've sat in on a few meetings, and I can assure you each director is fighting for their share and allocation, and also Jill and colleagues, heads of adult services, are very vocal in ensuring that the views of Torvine and each of the local authorities are represented. So it's probably not, I guess, a perfect process. It never is when you're sort of talking about money and allocations. But I would like to feel that all views are considered and there is a fair representation, because I think there would be sort of complaints going out to the Welsh Government if anybody felt that they weren't getting.
Yeah, we have a mature partnership across the local authorities and the Health Board. What I will be able to do, Councillor Evans, is following Regional Partnership Board this afternoon, is to give you the actual figures for Torvine, but quite a few of the projects are on a Gwent-wide basis, so that ensuring that we all benefit from that. Certainly some of the work that we've been doing this year with the learning disability community has been on a Gwent-wide basis, but we've facilitated that in Torvine. So we have kind of held the money, so to speak, but we ensured that all the citizens in Gwent learning disability benefited from that. So it's not necessarily that if we have the money that is just Torvine based, and likewise there are some pieces of work and projects that are hosted in other local authorities and the Health Board that all the local authorities benefit from. But I'd be able to give you some breakdown of where that money is allocated following this, the meeting this afternoon. Obviously, by the time that comes out, it won't be. It'll probably be in a week or so that I circulate that, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's good to hear you say that we are collaborating with the authorities for economy of scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Just to pick up the point around the lack parents, yes, in terms of the bid, it's recognising that children placed out of county lose their connections, not just to parents, of course, grandparents, other family members and friends, and that's why the outcomes are not as good as maybe we expected, and certainly maybe not as positive for the amount of money it costs. So hence another reason to look at the internal provision, so that those community of connections and support networks can still be maintained, even if there's been a breakdown with certain family members.
Thank you. We understand there will be a performance framework published with the plan, but there is no indication in the area plan to inform the reader of direction of travel, or the measures of success or current level or aspirations for improvement. Why is this?
Yes, in terms of the area plan, we're still developing the measures. That's one of the sections which we have to sort of go back with the strategic partnerships. As I mentioned, it's more like a working draft. I feel that there's a flavour of some of the progress measures, and at the beginning of each section of the plan, you'll notice that there's a title, How We Will Measure Success, and there's a stream of indicators. That is there for debate. But for me, where this plan is really going to make a difference is highlighting maybe 2 to 3, as you said, success measures that we ensure accountability and report on. So, for instance, one of the success measures around looked after the children and young people could be exactly what we've talked about, the number of children who have been placed out of the county. And that would be the measure that we use to gauge our success. Because if it's 100 now, really over 6 months, over a year, we should be looking to bring that down, shouldn't we? So those success measures are the lens that we use to gauge whether we've been successful or where the challenges are. So it's not exact. There are some sections which are better populated than others. The mental health and learning disability sections, the measures there, well, I don't think there is measures. The reason is that the mental health and the LD partnership are reviewing their regional strategy. So we're almost waiting for them to update their strategy before we then include it in the area plan. Because what we don't want to do is cause duplication. You know, we could put success measures in there, but then if that's not in sync with the mental health partnership and their regional strategy, they're going to duplicate and clash. So there is a little bit of a time lag here, unfortunately, and I would much rather be in a position where I could have presented all the information. However, with the working draft, it is still work in progress, but the majority of those partnerships will be meeting in the next few weeks to sign off on those measures. So outside of those meetings, we could bring them back to you. However, I just want to sort of stress, personally, and this is probably where we've been a little bit different to the rest of Wales, because I've looked at different area plans across Wales, is the real need to focus on 3 to 5 success measures. And in terms of where we're going, if anybody has any comments on what they would like to see in the area plan and success measures, that would be useful. But rest assured, each of those strategic groups, the next time they will meet, almost top of the agenda will be what measures will we be including in the area plan. I can only apologise that they're not here today, and that's because of the groups and 1 or 2 other factors.
I think it is worth noting again, the Chair and members, that from the children, young people and older people, the measures that are included here do come from Welsh Government, from the National Outcome Framework. So it isn't something that we've decided separately. It is something that we know that we have to report on from Welsh Government, and the Welsh Government have been quite prescriptive in some of those measures.
Thank you. Joe?
Following on from what you just said, all the measures are for looked after children, but as you said, that's dictated by the Welsh Government. Are you able to add how you'd measure success for children with complex needs who aren't looked after children?
That is a good question. I think, and Phil, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's up to the partnership board to. They have the ability to add to, but I don't think that they have ability to take away the prescribed measures from Welsh Government. That would be my view, but I don't know whether you have any other comments on that.
The partnerships, the strategic partnerships who are taking forward each section of this plan will have a certain autonomy to include measures of their own sort of wishes and what have you. So, any feedback that we've received today, I can take back to the partnership and say, look, this has been raised. What we don't want to do is add to the industry and put, say, 20, 30 measures in there. And we want to pick out the 3 to 5 key indicators which are really going to help us build the evidence for change, but also highlight where the challenges are. There will be a whole number of other performance indicators that are used underneath that. But I can certainly take that back. The group meets in a few weeks, and I can ask that question. So is it measures around complex needs of children who are not looked after? Yeah, I'll take that back. Thank you.
Thank you. Faye?
I was just wondering how you feel the budget, because you did say there was going to be some gaps, is going to cope with this plan, and, is it going to deliver the way you want it to, do you think? Or is that $1 million question?
It'd be nice for $1 million as well to give to us, to help us write the plan. I mean, obviously, money will come into it, but also I don't think we can use the money as an excuse as well. We have to sort of look at new innovative practices. We have to use innovation and new models, but also look about changing the culture, as Jill has mentioned earlier. It can be so easy just to say, well, look, there's a service, it's been taken away, we can't do anything now. But, we have to look at earlier intervention, linking in with our communities, building community resilience as well, where we can. But also, the public message that go out to all of us as public, and the need for us to sort of look after ourselves and lead a healthier lives. And we know we're living in an ageing population, and we will celebrate that in the fact that we are living longer, and that's great. But with an ageing population will come new opportunities and new challenges. The reason we're living longer is that we have public health messages now, don't we? How many people, excuse me for digressing, smoked in the 70s compared to people who smoke today? Those public messages come through. So we have to look at the information and advice that Jill's already mentioned. We need to look at that culture and early intervention. But we also need to use innovation. And if I can share an example with you, as part of the consultation with the PNA, I visited a group of ladies who were living with dementia, young ladies relatively, under the age of 65, and there was one lady who shared sort of experience of diagnosis, and said when she had that diagnosis, her sort of world was sort of fell in. She became very sort of embarrassed, she wasn't very confident, and she wouldn't leave the house. In fact, she wouldn't get out of bed until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when her husband came home from his shift pattern. So this was a lady whose rate of progression of dementia was really dropping off. And the one thing that made the big difference in her life is that she actually spoke to another lady living with dementia who'd had a diagnosis 2 or 3 years previously. And what this lady was able to say to you, I can understand what you're going through. I've gone through it. I can relate. But also, she was able to give her some advice and say, yes, this is a diagnosis, this is a disease, however, there's a life to be living, and this is what you need to be doing now to get yourself back on your feet, because we don't want people dropping off. We want people to be as strong and living in their own homes for as long as possible. So from that, we've set up a new scheme with Alzheimer's Society. So when people have a new diagnosis of dementia, there's an opportunity to link them to another person living with dementia, to give them their experience, but also to say, look, I had a diagnosis 2 years, for 6 to 12 months, this wasn't a great position. However, I linked with this group. I went to the Dementia Friendly Cafe. I linked with this group in terms of carers, and that has helped us to ensure that we're sustainable. Now, how much money does it cost to link a person living with, who has just had a diagnosis of dementia with another person? Pennies and pence compared to the millions of pounds. So that's just an example where we're trying to be innovative and to look at where we can help people. And how did I come, that is a feature within the PNA. How did we come across that? Well, it was only through engagement, going back to what Councillor said earlier about when we link in with citizens, because citizens and people, they will give us the solutions of what works as well. So, yes, more money would be great, but we're not going to use that as an excuse. We're going to try to be as innovative and to come up with new solutions to try and pick up as many solutions as possible.
Can I add as well? When we look at the allocation of the ICF funding, it's linked to the priorities come from the population needs assessment. So obviously we are guided by what's in the population needs assessment and the action plans and the priorities. One of the other things that I think which was raised earlier about we don't have to test something out in all the 5 areas. So that's where the collaboration and the relationships really help, because where we're looking at some of the priorities, what we've agreed across the partnership boards, okay, that looks as if that's working somewhere else in the UK or internationally. We'll test that out in Monmouthshire, or we'll test that out in Torvine or wherever, so that some of the pilot schemes actually are quite small amounts of money. But what we're trying to do over the next 12 months, then, actually, let's see if that works. If it works, what does that mean about rolling that out across the 5 local authorities? Because, as I say, some of the schemes, if you times it by 5, actually, you can't test everything out. So that we are looking at that approach to make sure that we're hopefully, we are ticking the boxes. We're actually absolutely focusing on the priorities, but stretching that money out as far as we can to see what works.
Can I just say then, does that mean that your signposting has to be excellent, and that perhaps you're relying on the third sector quite a lot?
Yes, I mean, you're all aware of DAWIS and trying to develop that database as best we can, but it is a database that is only as good as the information that goes on, and obviously that has to be updated very regularly. We're not totally reliant on the third sector, but absolutely they're a massive part, as is TVA, certainly locally, and locally, obviously, we work with the community connectors and the social prescribers, also as those conduits around information and advice. So it's not just the one sector, it's everybody. I think my message is it's everybody's business. So another area of work which we're trying to look at with the Health Board is where we're looking at, we've got the neighbourhood care networks, but it's about the neighbourhood wellbeing networks, and actually mapping out what training in those networks do all those frontline staff need. When I say training, it's about that awareness. So if they do come across a situation, actually they don't have to refer in to someone else. They'll have a little bit of knowledge about, maybe that would help, and that's all the frontline workers. That's a huge piece of work, which has only just started we're just kind of mapping out what that will mean as far as numbers, and again that will be replicated across all the boroughs.
Thank you.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question, and it's quite relevant actually at the moment with the amalgamation and closure of schools in Torvine, and with all the emotional things that's happening there. Can you give us, how will you measure the success and impact of these closures on the school moves? There's both positive and negative, and this measures make no distinction. Can you give us a bit more information around that?
In terms of school closures, obviously... In terms of school closures, obviously a traumatic process for all involved. I mean, I know within the education, that before any closure takes place, there needs to be consideration of the views of the pupils, and we can link into that process. Part of the the plan itself will also look at the emotional well-being of pupils within our schools and look at the programmes that we take in. It's the first time I've been asked that question, and I don't want to just say, let me go away and speak to education to sort of find out how that impact, because it's very much this sort of piece of work. But yes, it would have an experience, and I think if I'll feed that back to colleagues to use that as a factor. But I know part of this scheme, we have been linking in with schools to look at improving emotional well-being, and that could be down to exam stress. It could be down just to peer pressure, pressures from society to look a certain way, etc. And all that has been considered, and there is a working group looking at that. So I will take that back and to sort of for them to consider. But it's the first time I've been asked that question, and. Yeah.
And the point I would make is it is a regional plan. So where you have specific local issues, I don't think a regional plan is going to cover all of that. But it is something I think that we just need to pick up with education colleagues, because if I'm honest, Councillor, I can't answer, I don't have the detail of how locally the education department is going to measure that. But it's something I can ask education colleagues and pass on your comments. But it isn't, as it's a regional plan, it isn't something that's going to be in that detail of being picked up in the action plan.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Phil. Because I don't think we are quite aware of the emotional impact that it has on our, not only the pupils themselves, but the parents as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. How will you measure success in terms of good mental health and emotional well-being, as the chosen indicators don't appear to include these aspects for children and young people who are known to social services?
Okay, I'll come back in there and refer back to the previous point around the Mental Health and Learning Disability Committee updating their regional partnership. As much as I would have liked to have had those measures included, they simply haven't been identified yet by those groups. So as soon as they are made available, I can bring them back. I believe that the mental health regional strategy is just being signed off for consultation, and that will be circulated across the region shortly, but I'll go away and find out. There are measures within Welsh Government strategies, like things like Together for Mental Health. However, there are previous measures that have also been used, but in terms of the review, I think there was a need to look at them and ensure that they were appropriate. That is one of those areas, unfortunately, that's still being developed, and what we have, unfortunately, I suppose, is the need to produce this plan by the 1st of April for Welsh Government, and it's just a shame, really, that the regional strategy has fallen outside of those timescales. But it's certainly something we can bring back, and something I'm keen to sort of include as well to ensure that the plan is effective.
Yeah, can I just ask a quick
Stuart?
On that, Phil's just mentioned the time scale of getting the plan through. Do you think that that's a realistic target for us to be achieved?
Well, like with any point in time, you know, there's always going to be a certain amount of information you can put in, but, you know, a plan's out of date the moment the ink goes dry, doesn't it? You know, because if something happens tomorrow, if a grant is made available or new priority, the plan is out of date as soon as the ink dries in that sense. That is why we have going to create the performance framework, where each one of the sections will be presented to the Partnership Board for updates throughout the year. So, for instance, the mental health measures, they may not be in this area plan, but by the time the mental health partnership reports up to the Partnership Board, they will be in there, and they will have to be in there so that the Partnership Board can hold them to account. So it's a sort of an organic process. We'll keep adding to it. It just so happens at this point in time the information's not available, unfortunately.
And it's also thinking about, particularly in relation to improved mental health around children, so, some of that information will be, obviously we need to think about how we collect that with our partners. So in the CAMS service, what information does the Health Board have? What are the performance measures that they currently have that would help us? Excuse me. And that's why those discussions are going on in the partnership with Learning Disability Mental Health Partnership Board at the moment. But I can see from your point, and when it says mental well-being among children and young people not currently available, which is that's the testing bit. So how do we get that? And as Phil said, sorry, that we haven't got the actuals of how we're going to collate that at the moment and measure it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, that comes from the Public Health Outcome Framework, which is Welsh Government-led. So we know that there'll be provision in place. But it's a very good point. Thank you for raising it, because I get a little bit frustrated that some measures are not in there, and this will involve maybe some other partners forwarding me information. So the fact that you've raised it today now gives me an opportunity to go back to the partnership and say, look, this has been raised by the Scrutiny Committee in Torfaen. Can we speed up the, and give us a little bit more thought, because we really should be including those measures. So thank you.
Thank you. Chair?
Thanks, Chair. When we go back to measuring mental health within the younger generation, so what you're actually saying is we've got no figures from anywhere?
I wouldn't say we've got no figures. What we don't have is a consistent collection of those figures across Gwent, and I think that's where the partnership will be looking to ensure that there's a regional consistency going forward. Each service that supports people with emotional well-being will have some sort of performance measures, whether it's school-based counselling or even the things such as the Mike Online service, which is a sort of a website that young people can use if they have any sort of concerns, emotional well-being concerns, etc. For instance, we'll be able to tell you how many people use that website, even though it's funded through Welsh Government. So the information is there, but I don't think what we have is that consistency, and maybe, like I said, in terms of the document, in terms of the Public Health Outcome Framework, we know what we want to measure, but we haven't measured it as well, and it maybe cannot be presented. So I think for me, it's about getting, maybe 2 or 3 success measures, so that we're not getting hung up on maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 different measures, which may be different in Torfaen compared to Blaenau Gwent and how they're measured in Caerphilly. So hopefully that will come through in terms of the final plan.
That's it. I think there is information in pockets from the Health Board, but from a local authority perspective, and I'm going to look to Helen now to correct me, but for the KPIs that we collect from a local authority within children's services, there isn't any measure there around mental health well-being within children. I am correct in saying that. I know it's the same. It's not particularly my area, but I'm certainly... So that is a gap. That is a massive gap, because we know it is an increasing concern across Wales, well, across the UK, around mental health in young children and adolescents. So it is important that we get those measures right, because we need to find out, actually, are we making any difference? Is what it always comes back to, isn't it?
It's not so much just are we making a difference, but have we having an increase? And we haven't got the facts and figures? No, if we have...
So public health, I would think that public health may have some information, but it isn't something that we collect as a local authority. So as a partnership, because we'll have 2 partnerships, I think, that will be impacted on, which is the Mental Health and Learning Disability Partnership, but it's also the Children and Families Partnership. So between them, that's why the partnerships do work, because at least we can input into this now from public health, from the Health Board, about what are the measures that we know that are there that we can report on.
Fee?
I was just wondering, would it be possible to use very sort of simple questionnaires for parents, carers, young people, and frontline staff in places like CAMS? Would that not make a difference to what we understand?
I haven't got the knowledge of the CAMS service, I'm sorry, but I would suggest that I would have thought there might be something in place, but to say it's not kind of information that we access at the moment or pull together as a partnership. But what hopefully Phil will do is to ask that question back into the partnership. One, is it happening? Or if it's not happening, can it happen?
I'd be very surprised if there's not some sort of questionnaire evaluation with young people, but I will go away and find out. It's not information I've got, sort of at my sort of fingertips at the moment. But just going back to emotional well-being in schools and what have you, I suppose if I walked into any school today and spoke to a teacher, they would probably tell me that they've seen an increase over the years. We run a emotional well-being, it was a well-being conference in a Newport school recently, and they were concerned about emotional well-being, and they started to think about what they can be doing as a school, even things such as yoga classes for pupils as well. But also there was a peer-to-peer scheme there as well in sense of exam stress. And one of the suggestions that came out, for pupils going through that pressure of exams, etc., do we link them with pupils maybe in the sixth form who've gone through the GCSE exams and speak to the pupils at maybe year 10 to sort of say, look, when I was in year 10, I didn't take this overly seriously. This is what you should be doing. So there's lots of ideas, but like I said, the pockets, and we are trying to build the evidence. There was a debate in Basleg School recently around, and this was a following on from a national debate, are schools bad for your mental health? Because, it's a genuine question, and if you speak to CAMS colleagues, they will say a number of referrals they receive is due to pupils' pressures they face within school. So there's a real need to break down and understand that. And like I said, there are pockets of good practice, but part of this plan under emotional well-being is to look at a regional approach. And that's what hopefully we'll be bringing forward, and will be included in the new strategy as well.
Dave?
I was involved a while back in some cognitive behavioural curriculum work that we did with children in some large schools in Newport to help those who are a little bit vulnerable under exam pressure or had social worries and mental health, and that worked brilliantly, but it was very limited, and again it was only for a short time because of many pressures. So I just wondered, were you going to be able to collate all the good work that had gone on and all the different projects that have taken place in pockets in the 5 counties, and see if you could come up with a very tight strategy and some, take away that good practice and perhaps spread it around, and increase it. Is that possible with the monies that are on offer?
I mean, that's something we're already starting to think about. I met with colleagues in Newport recently, and they're making an application to their Public Services Board for a small amount of money to pay for supply cover for a teacher from every school to come together for a conference to do exactly that, to look at all these different initiatives taking place in school, which work, which programmes work, which don't. Do we have a sort of consistency so that it's not a postcode lottery? If you go to one school, you have a very good provision about well-being. If you go to another school, you don't. I mean, it's not helpful, I will say this, in terms of the drive and from Welsh Government and inspectorates around attainment, qualification, attendance and what have you. And really, if you get well-being right, the attendance, the qualifications, the GCSE results all come up. The attendance comes up. And I think what's happening is that the emphasis, and this is when I speak to school teachers, is on those qualification results all the time. Attendance, results, attendance. And maybe that well-being has been pushed to the background a bit. What we need to do is put that well-being of people right at the centre, because if you get that right, all the other stuff starts falling into place as well.
Important time.
Joe?
Thinking about well-being of young adults in school, 15, 16-year-olds, and having strategies in place then to help them. What about getting in early intervention, going into primary schools and teaching coping strategies there, etc.?
Yeah. Can I? One of all these points are really important around how we link with education colleagues. What we have to be very careful is that we don't have duplication and overlaps. So whilst the action plan quite rightly focuses on the well-being, and it's a well-being from cradle to the grave, there will be certain elements that will be focused on by the social care and health partnerships, and there will be certain areas, I guess, would be focused through the education department. So, and I think that's where it's going to be key for Phil, which he is doing, is actually making those connections, because I would suggest from the Children and Young Persons Partnership and the Learning Disability and Mental Health Partnership are not going to incorporate all the agenda that comes under education as well. So the dovetailing is going to be absolutely key. So just a point I wanted to make, to ensure that we don't have the duplication. But as Phil has already mentioned, he is making those connections with education colleagues across Gwent as well as Torfaen to see actually what's happening and so there might be reference in the plan, but it's not necessarily the responsibility of the partnerships mentioned in here to deliver that, but it's about knowing what is being delivered and then being able to identify what the gaps are.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very good point, actually, Jill. You've reminded me of a hugely important piece of work, and that's the link with the wellbeing of future generations and the wellbeing plan. And for instance, I included an annex at the end of the draft report. It's on page 51 of the actual report I have. But what I've set out is the priorities of this plan against the priorities within the 5 wellbeing plans under the Future Gens Act. And you will notice that each of the plans, from Blaen y Gwent across to Torfaen, all have a positive start in life.
Can I just stop you there, because it's not on page. The way that these are numbered, just so that
it's towards the back. Thanks, Jill.
It's okay.
Yes, it will be in terms of your report, we'll get there now, page 59. In your report, you will notice that each of the 5 local wellbeing plans all highlight a best possible start in life, and early years is a feature here in Torfaen and Caerphilly. So again, picking up on Jill's point, what we will not do is duplicate efforts. So for instance, the regional area plan would not look to take forward an early years piece of work if that's being picked up in the wellbeing plan, and vice versa. You know, those wellbeing plans really shouldn't be looked after children placed out of county if we are picking it up as well. So there's a trade-off in those priorities, and there is a regional group that the 5 PSB managers come together with colleagues like myself to ensure that there is a sort of a join-up. But also, you know, there are some priorities that we'll take forward individually. For instance, I've mentioned looked after children within the area plan, maybe, you know, early years within the 5 wellbeing plans. However, there's some priorities that we will work together on, and the obvious one there is the ACE agenda, which will require the work of the Regional Partnership Board and the 5 PSBs and all other partners to be totally effective. So I think the ACE agenda will be looking to pick up on those emotional resilience of maybe younger people and looking to identify an earlier opportunity.
So if we can move on now to older people.
I wonder if you'd allow me to just ask
Okay, Stu, yeah.
a brief question about the well-being, going back to pupils. Have you got any data, and I wouldn't imagine you would be able to provide that today, about young people who have dropped out of schooling and are having tutoring at home because of emotional stresses while they're at school?
I think that's probably from the education division would have that kind of data, Councillor Evans, but it's not something from a social care perspective that we would collate. It would be through education.
I wondered if there would be a social input into it as well, and that's why I asked the question.
I'd say the data question, then no, it isn't something that we collate as social care. However, I know that there's very strong links, obviously, with education, where there are children being schooled at home. If there are other family issues, obviously it would be appropriate for social care to be involved. So there is a good relationships, definitely very good relationships between social care and education, and with the particular teams and particular schools. And that's really, really important. But I haven't got that data. I could ask education colleagues if they've got it, but it's not something that social care would collate.
Thank you, Jill.
Just moving on from that point, I know that children who were educated at home didn't need to see anybody from social services or education once it was set up. Is that still the case?
I wouldn't, apologies, but I don't have the answer to that, but I will ask my my colleagues and feedback to you if that's okay.
That just seems to be a gap. This, you know, some children could fall in, as the one in North Wales did. That's a little bit dangerous. I would have thought. I wondered if that needs to be written in at all.
So the question is, what is the follow-up arrangements for children who are schooled at home? Yeah?
In a previous life, I worked within safeguarding, and that was going back a few years ago, and there was talk about a register and a regular visit, but unfortunately that can only be agreed by the parent. So again, go back to Jill's point, it's been a few years since I've been involved in it, but we can go away and find out.
Nick?
Yes, just before we move on to older people, I just want to come back to page 15 of your actual report and ask a general question on that. Are you saying on there that you've got a 147% increase in the over 85 population? Can you tell us where you got that information from, please?
Let me have a look. Which page is it again, sorry? 85 increase in predicted. That's probably lifted from our PNA and the daffodil. So if it's...
page 15 of that.
Yes.
Page 15 at that one. The data, and again, Phil will be able to confirm that we use a system called Daffodil, which is a Welsh population system, and so which is managed through Welsh Government?
Yes, it's a Welsh Government funded project. It would be the daffodil system. Most of the graphs that you see in the report probably come from daffodil in terms of the population predictions.
And the daffodil system actually shows the demographics and the trends right across all Welsh authorities. And it's something that we would log into as an authority to get that data.
So you have confidence in those figures, and this is what you're using to base all of your reports on, is it?
Yeah, and certainly we have assurances from Welsh Government that that's the up-to-date predictions. So and all Welsh local authorities use that system to inform their direction and do their planning.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. If you want to move on with this section.
Yeah. If we can move on to older people. Is there a definition of older people, as it's not clear what you were measuring, as measures of success relate to different age groups, these being over 65, over 75 and over 18, and qualitative measures relate to 10 years of age and over? Do the chosen indicators measure changes in emotional well-being, loneliness, social isolation and early intervention?
It's a good question about older people, and the group that's actually been set up to take forward this agenda actually refrain from using the word older people. It's now adult strategic partnership, to pick up on that point. The word older people is included in this report as is prescribed by Welsh Government. So, you know, in terms of writing this report, we have to have a section on older people. However, in terms of how we deliver going forward, there's recognition that there will be adults right across the age range who will be requiring some support, whether it's service-based or even emotional well-being and community support. So yes, the older people is the definition, I suppose, is set by Welsh Government in that we have to use that word, but we will be working right across the range, and it'll be up for the partnerships when we work with them to identify, you know, the appropriate people who require those supports, irrespective of age.
But for performance purposes, we count an older person as somebody 65 and above. Some of the other performance, I can think of one of the performance KPI is around delay transfers of care, which Welsh Government prescribe. We report on people who are delayed over the age of 75. As far as I'm aware, that 75 benchmark has been in place ever since that delayed transfer of care performance indicator was created, which is many years ago, and we did question it at the time. Actually, why are we reporting on everybody over 75? But that is something that Welsh Government have kept to. And when we are working with partner agencies, particularly in the third sector, we know that Age Connect, Age Cymru, operate on a different. Some volunteer organisations and third sector organisations count an older person as somebody over 55, and some organisations some over 60. But performance measures we report as local authority 65 and above. And I agree, it is very confusing.
Nick?
So that's the first bit, sorry, and then there was a second part to the question as well.
Isolation and loneliness in terms
Yes,
of the measure.
can we just come back on that? Because I just wanted to pick that just a little bit further, if I might. I think what we were trying to get at with that question is that your qualitative questionnaires are for people aged 10 and above. And we just couldn't see the relevance of that when we're talking about older people.
Which page are you referring to?
We're on page 28 of the report. Not the booklet, not the PNA booklet,
Yeah.
but of the report.
Yeah, if we can. This might refer to the national survey.
Page 28 in older people.
Being treated with dignity. Yeah,
Yes.
the qualitative
Okay.
questionnaire has been developed by Welsh Government. Again, a statutory requirement that each local authority completes that questionnaire. What I've included there is the types of questions that have been included. So,
I can, sorry,
Yeah.
I can absolutely see what you're saying. This is a section on older people, and it's saying that around the being treated with dignity and respect for older people, that survey would go out for people 65 and above. And I can appreciate here what we've got is age 10 plus, which is confusing.
Yeah, and 18 plus. It
Yes.
seems to be a more general questionnaire. And we just thought that was maybe in the wrong place, or was maybe, hadn't have been reviewed sufficiently.
we'll make that clear in the final document.
Right. When will the Health, Housing and Social Care Partnership Delivery Plan be developed and implemented?
The partnership is working on it at the moment, and it's timely in the sense that we now have an area plan, a draft area plan in place, because what we're now able to do is to ensure that the health, housing, social care plan is the same as the area plan, that we're not duplicating efforts. So I will go back and ask the question on exactly what timeframes they're working to. However, I'd like to think by the 1st of April, by the time that this area plan is published, that they would at least have a very high-end working draft, or if not a final plan in place by then, to coincide with the area plan.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. You gave us a bit of flavour, Phil, about dementia earlier, but can you give us how do you arise that the indicators measures include outcomes of people living with dementia? And you give us a bit of a flavour earlier, as I pointed out. But could you expand on that, on the outcomes?
On how we will then improve outcomes for people. Diagnosis rate is the first and foremost. In the UK, I think we're working about 50% average. So for every person who has a diagnosis of dementia, there's another person in the community that does not. When you speak to people living with dementia, they tell us that there's a wasted opportunity. If they had not had a diagnosis earlier, they could have started to make the provisions, lifestyle changes, maybe even medication to slow down that progression. So the diagnosis rate is an obvious one. The number of people who are dementia aware in the community, the Dementia Friendly Communities agenda, is another measure, so that people can carry on living their life in their community and not feel embarrassed if they go to a supermarket and maybe get lost, etc. And the other is around training for staff as well. But, where this Act is different, it's individual. in terms of the provision and support. So we will be looking to engage with people living with dementia through dementia-friendly cafes to speak to individuals to find out what constitutes good and an outcome as well.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back in very briefly?
Yes,
Perhaps I have made myself very clear here, Phil. What I wanted to know is what measures of improved outcomes for people with dementia.
Well, as I said, that's individual, so we would be going back to people to sort of say, have you received quality support, following your diagnosis? We refer to information and advice. But I would go, when I've spoken to people living with dementia, they have said, information and advice being signposted to groups, because that's helped improve emotional well-being, but it's also provided support for the carers. It will be a developing landscape. But has that answered your question? It's a suite of measures.
Yeah, can I say, getting feedback with clients from dementia is very dependent on where they are in the pathway. So for somebody with advanced dementia, it is quite difficult to around the communication for that person to communicate. Have their outcomes improved and whatever. That's very much through carer feedback. As I say, it's really difficult. When we review and have those conversations with carers and clients in the community or in residential and nursing care, then we are looking at how does that person present? Do they present as that they are happy or agitated in their environment? But there are some people going to be agitated in their environment regardless of that environment, depending on where they are in that pathway. And I'm sorry, Councillor Evans, I know it's not specifically answering your question. So where I would say is easier is where somebody has had that diagnosis, and that is about then that engagement, and we do have the questionnaires that go out to clients with dementia, depending on where they are in that pathway, to gauge, did they feel that they we took into account what they wanted when we were doing the planning, and that's some of the feedback that we get. But it's when you're on the end of the pathway, it is very difficult. Then we do engage with carers, we engage with advocacy, obviously Alzheimer's Society, but it is a real difficult area to report on.
Yeah, that's why I raised the question, because I can imagine that you are totally relying on family members and carers, as you said.
And advocacy and
there's not
Alzheimer's.
Real improved outcomes, is it, with Alzheimer's, I suppose?
Yeah.
But thank you for part of that.
It is about enabling somebody, whatever part of the pathway that they're on, enabling them to live the life that they want to live the best that we can, whilst managing the risk. I mean, that's what the outcome that we're looking for. So when you say how we report on it, we haven't got a measure, but the practice that we would use is actually, if that person can't communicate what they would have liked, then how do we use previous information, and how do we engage with carers or people who have worked with that person to enable us to understand what they would have liked if they were able to communicate. So that's an approach about how we try and support people with the outcomes that they would like, rather than a measure. So again, I'm sorry, it's not answering your question.
I appreciate it's a really difficult one, but I just wanted to tease it out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Joe?
Thinking of the dementia-friendly community, what is the vision? What does the ideal dementia-friendly community look like, and how will you measure its success?
So I come in there. Yeah, dementia-friendly communities is an aspiration where every member of the community would be dementia aware, just like every member of the community would be aware of child protection. And if you went home tonight and you saw a child walking down the street at 10 o'clock, a 4-year-old in pyjamas, we'd all know inherently that there's something wrong, we'd have to do something. Well, it'll be the same with dementia-friendly communities. So one of the measures that we do use is the number of people who've had the Dementia Friends awareness, you know, the 45 minutes awareness session. Since we've started across Gwent, I think we're up to 15,000 people who've had that dementia awareness. The number of businesses who have staff which are dementia aware, whether that's banks, building societies, supermarkets, and public sector organisations as well. But it's also in terms of the understanding as well amongst the younger generation. Griffithstown Primary School was the first primary school in Gwent to become dementia aware. So very much it's awareness and it's support for those carers as well. The two biggest factors in helping a person live with dementia enable them to sort of live as long as within their own homes for as long as possible. You know, when you speak to Alzheimer's Society, it's down to two factors. That is awareness, and that's our own awareness in the community, and support, and that normally comes from carers and loved ones as well. So that's what dementia-friendly community support is focused on, is that awareness amongst the community. And I've spoken to someone living with dementia, and they said, wear your badge, because when I'm out there in the community, and if I'm walking through a high street, or if I'm getting on a bus, if I see someone with a badge, she said, you know, that's great for me. I know that there's someone I can ask for a little bit of help and support if I need. So they're the two big focuses.
Can I also add that I think it's about how we are impacting on the younger generation now, so the intergenerational work that is happening across schools and wards and schools and residential and nursing homes. It is about actually getting that awareness very early in your development and years, whereas a vision for me is if we do that intergenerational work, actually supporting somebody with dementia and to say that awareness and that interaction, actually when people are growing up, that will become second nature. Because again, it comes back to it's everybody's business, and actually it's how we respond to that person in the community so that they don't feel embarrassed, relatives don't feel embarrassed, that you do that, the community kind of ensuring that they're okay, that's that community response. So I think that intergenerational work, which again, it's only in pockets at the moment, but there's some really, really good work that's going on locally and nationally. So a vision for me is about how we kind of develop that further.
Can I just come in on that point, Chair? Congratulate Phil Diamond for the work that he's done with dementia, because I know that Pontypool has done a lot of work there. In the ward I represent, Glenavon, there's a lot of work being done there, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Phil for the effort that he has put in that regard. Thank you.
I mean, thank you for that, but I will, put on record that it is a team effort as well, and there's some fantastic partners within Blaenavon who are helping that, especially within Big Pit, the post office as well. So it takes a team effort to take forward. So, but thank you for the recognition of all the partners involved.
Thank you, Phil. Faye?
Going on from that point again, thinking that we have partnerships with housing providers and things like this, are there any manuals out there to help people who do things like provide housing, which covers elderly people, understand how to sort of behave and what to do for best practice? Because I just wondered about this bill altogether and the piece of work you put together. Are there manuals on how to work together and how to get the best outcomes and what is good practice?
Well, I come in, it's not just manuals, but it's actually the dementia awareness. That face-to-face awareness training works a lot more effectively than manuals. Yes, there's information that we provide, but both Melin, United Wales, some of the larger housing associations have all come on board as becoming dementia aware, and what that means is that all of the staff will have the Dementia Friends awareness, but also that gives the opportunity for staff to change their behaviours, for instance. I spoke to someone recently and they were having complaints that the carpet was dirty, etc. There's lots of bugs in my carpet, and they kept going round. Well, unfortunately, it was a lady with dementia who was having a perception problem. There was no bugs, it was just the fleck within the carpet. What that housing association were able to do is change the carpet and complaints. But it was only because they had the dementia awareness to understand that, you know, that perception is an issue for people with dementia.
Sorry, can I just add this? I agree with Phil, it's not just about manual, that the training is also directed at the maintenance staff as well, so that when they are going into somebody's property, that they know around the communication, so there's kind of communication skills, but obviously with the officers within the RSLs that manage some of the more retirement housing, obviously there is additional training for officers about how they support people with dementia. We have, even in the design now, when we're working with RSLs about the design of the houses or extra care support, they'll all have additional training on the surveyors and the builders around how do you design that home that's dementia friendly, because there is something about colours of carpets, patterns, colours, certain colours, and how you distinguish colours and things like that. So all that's built in. And I would say I can absolutely see a change in practice, because going back to 10 years ago, we would, as an adult social care department, have contact from RSLs saying, you know, this person can't possibly continue to live in their own council, well, it was council housing at the time, because of the risks involved. Actually, we've come a long way, and we have now the conversations with how do we continue to support this person to live in their home, rather than you have to find an alternative for this person. It's a different conversation, and I think that's marvellous that we've seen that journey, really.
Thank you.
Phil, one last question. How do you qualify for the badge before we move on?
It's a 45-minute awareness session, and I've delivered it here in the council chamber in the past, but it has been optional. But it'll be very easy for me to organise another session for councillors and anybody else who's interested in receiving the awareness. It only takes 45 minutes.
I think that would be a good way forward.
Okay. No problem.
Right, as we move on to health and physical disabilities 1, how will the Care Closer to Home strategy improve access to transport or reduce the need for transport?
Again.
Okay. Well, the Care Closer to Home, as far as the principles of Care Closer to Home, are actually where you can deliver diagnostics or look at maybe clinical centres nearer to the person's home, the better. So that is part of, obviously, the Clinical Futures and Care Closer to Home strategy. The Health Board are currently mapping out, and I just think of an example at the moment. They're looking at, and I'm sorry, I can't give you the clinical term, but it's around the warfarin clinics, where patients at the moment have to go regularly to either the Royal Gwent or Neville Hall to get their the warfarin levels kind of readjusted and whatever. What the Health Board are looking at now is what are the accommodation as far as the estate within an Iron Bevan. What have you got on the localities that we can set up those clinics locally? Therefore, that people don't necessarily have to travel to the Royal Gwent or Neville Hall. So some people rely on ambulance services for attending those appointments. Some people still might need an ambulance service or a taxi service through the Health Board to get to those more local environments. And that's just an example of what people are looking at the moment. So where we can provide something local and it is cost effective, because we do have to think about what's cost effective. we're not going to be able to look at a clinic at the end of everybody's street. And I think we've got to be realistic in that. So part of the work is the mapping out of how many people attend in what areas. So is there a cohort of people or patients that could attend more of a local facility? And that's the kind of work that they're doing. Just that's one area around warfarin. What they're looking, I think, is around another area, which I think is quite, I have to say, quite bizarre, that people around hearing impairment have to go to Neville Hall or the Royal Gwent to get their batteries changed. And all the hassle that entails. So that's another very small area, but actually who's presenting, what are their addresses, how can we do that service locally? So the impact on the transport, say it's not going to, I can't say that it's going to completely eradicate the transport issues, because it's not, because as I said, it has to be affordable, and I said, so it's not going to be on the end of everybody's street, but it is trying to make that response more local. Just as some examples there, really.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming in on the back of that, I know I've been approached in my ward about people with diabetes and which have to travel to Newport and possibly Neville Hall, and I'd welcome this kind of service being provided closer to home, and that meets that target. And in reference to what you were saying about urinates as well, that facility is offered currently in Bynhaven for clearing of urinates and what have you, the pipes attached to the urinate. So I welcome any initiative to bring that closer to home.
Yeah, I haven't got a full list of initiatives, but as you can appreciate, the Health Board, there are a number of initiatives that they're working through, Care Closer to Home, just working on those principles. Excuse me, sorry.
What does the priority mean? Is it an outcome? Will citizens understand this element of the plan? This is health and physical disabilities too.
Let's have a look. Which page number are you referring to, John? Look, mine's slightly different. Page 33. Yes. I mean, this goes back to a point I made previously, in that we'll be linking with well-being plans. Now, for instance, the wider general health of the public, we feel is better suited to be delivered through the Public Service Board's well-being plans. At the time of press, those plans hadn't been completed, they were still in draft format. So what the outcome there is basically setting out that we will work with the 5 wellbeing plans to look at what they've included in terms of their wider general health. So yeah, it probably needs to be worded. I mean, what I'll be able to do now is to go back to, and for instance to say, you know, looking at the appendix, is that in certain areas, bear with me, let's have a look. For instance, in Newport, in Torfaen, the priority is limiting the impact on chronic health conditions through earlier support and healthier lifestyles, and it's the same within Blaenau Gwent as well. Long and healthy lives for all to equalise health life expectancies. So the detail of that will be set out in the wellbeing plans, and there's a role for me now to go away and to sort of make that a bit more clearer. But it's just to demonstrate that as a plan, health and physical health, mainly wider health, is probably going to be a lot more suited within the wellbeing plans in terms of taking forward. Good point.
Yes, can I just ask another question more generally around the second half of that question? My understanding is that this is going to be a public document.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the wording in it is appropriate for the general public? We had lots of questions around what do you mean by this, and that's ourselves. I see that, you've very kindly explained an awful lot of it. So maybe you have a clearer idea of what some of these things mean. Do we think that maybe before this goes anywhere near the public, that it is looked at and put into words that everybody might understand so they can see perhaps what you're really trying to get at with some of these things?
Yeah.
I know it'll be a lot of work, need rewriting everything, but we did bring that up quite often.
It's always been the intention, I don't think this maybe has been, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I suppose, to produce a public version and a young people's version as well. What we're waiting for is the plan to be completed and signed off, and then we'll produce a more of a summarised, user-friendly version. But yes, the template that you see in front of you, or you've been used again, has been prescribed through Welsh Government. Social Care Wales were tasked with coming up with a template for use across Wales, and we've used that template pretty much as Welsh Government have asked us to. However, I think it's a good point, and like I said, it is something that we've already thought about. We wouldn't expect the public to be picking up on and reading that as it stands, so we will be looking to produce a public version where it's broken down a lot more simply.
But I think what's also been helpful today is some of the comments you've made around definitions. So that is a wider issue that maybe there needs some explanation of why we've used certain definitions, or certainly around the age groups, maybe some clarification needs to be added as well.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things that we were particularly looking at on page 28, older people, we were discussing, the regional priorities and the outcomes. The sentence says to improve emotional well-being for older people, and then it goes on to say by reducing loneliness and social isolation with earlier intervention and community resilience. A prime example of maybe what we're talking about in that, the priority should be to improve emotional well-being for older people. A full stop there would be very helpful, because some of the rest of the sentence is about how we will do that. Okay. And we didn't think it was particularly useful in the actual definition and the outcome. Okay. Maybe something to take on board. That's an example of what we were looking at. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's a key point. And there's lots of correlation between poor emotional well-being and loneliness and isolation, and I think that's probably where it's crept in. But yeah, that can certainly be changed to reflect that, yes, emotional well-being, period, is what we're looking to improve. That could be improved by improving isolation.
It's what we're looking to achieve and what the action is.
Yeah.
Further to the mental health too, what provisions are in place for those who do not have the skills or resources to access DEWIs? In measuring the number of hits to DEWIs, is measuring the number of hits to DEWIs sufficient to judge if the information held on DEWIs is having a positive impact on those accessing the site?
It's one string to the bow, really. It's one measure. We wouldn't totally be reliant on the measure of DEWIS telling us that there's good access to information and advice and assistance. There are a number of different ways people get hold of information. It could be face-to-face, word of mouth. It could be through community connectors, the signposts in there, and also third sector partners. And I think the measure is there to give an example of what we could measure, but it would not be the full box of measures, would not totally rely on that one measure. So there'll be other measures that we'll include as well.
If I'm honest, I think that's probably it's a Welsh Government measure about actually this is a system that Welsh Government have funded, and actually are people using it. It is as crude as that, because I would expect, certainly as Phil has mentioned around community connectors, actually if you've got those and the voluntary sector, if you've got people in the community, once they know what's available, they're not going to be checking on DEWIS all the time. It's up here, so it is a way of different people can kind of tap in. That's not just about the public or the user or the carers. It is about the people that we have in the communities can kind of update on that. A lot of this stuff is word of mouth. So for those people who can't, through a number of reasons, access DEWIS, it is about how do we use those frontline staff, whether it's, say, I'm making an example of the community connectors because actually that is their role. But how do they make sure that they give that information? They access DOIS and then they pass on that information. But yeah, the measure is a very crude measure, I would suggest.
And you said that because there seems to be a lot now going round reliance on IT when there's a lot of people can't access IT.
Yeah.
Sensory impairment. Can you explain how these measures can be used to measure the impact of your activities on support delivered to sensory impaired people to improve emotional well-being through peer support? What is actually going to be delivered to support and rehabilitate those people with sensory impairment?
There's an eye care board that is currently working within the health board. And that's a regional board which is coming together to improve support and outcomes, I guess, really, for people with sensory impairment. And we've also received consultation comments from national third sector organisations in terms of RNID and one or two other organisations. And so we'll be using their comments to determine what we now need to take forward. But again, it's an anecdote. I'll go back, and this is from Blaenau Gwent, and I visited a group there of people with visual impairments and hearing impairments. And there was one lady, older lady, who was unfortunately becoming very depressed and very down about losing her eyesight gradually. And it was a real issue for her. What made a difference for her, or what helped her, is that she was able to chat to another person again within the group, and she'd been connected to this group in terms of people with similar issues to herself, and they were able to sort of bounce off each other. But she sat down and had a chat to a gentleman who had gone through the sort of issue and was able to sort of give her a lift. Now I'm only reciting to you the words that was actually fed back to me by the lady, and she said, it was only when I chatted to this person by ear that, yes, it's still an issue, my eyesight, etc., but I just felt a bit better after speaking to this person. So we've tried to capture that feedback from people themselves, like I said, people with real, who have visual impairments, to look at what we then produce. So we will now be going back to those groups to look at how we take that forward. But for them, really, it was having that opportunity to meet with peers and to discuss the issues. And I was actually part of the group, and for instance, they were talking about benefits advice, and you could just see them bouncing off each other. Well, have you contacted this person? They're really good in helping with your benefits. Have you contacted that person in terms of transport? So in the simplest sense, it would be to continue to support those processes, those types of initiatives. But in terms of dedicated measures, that's something we'll go back to the IK board, but that would be for me where it sort of picks up.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. On the back of the last question, and I understand what you're saying about mentors, Phil, and it's good that they are mentoring these people to give their advice and signposting. But do you think we should be doing more, and have we got too much reliant on mentors?
We still have the reablement services within each of the local authorities that support people, particularly with vision impairment. Those services are still going. I guess it's about the supplementary, but I would be very interested to hear what the iCare board are coming out with about. I think it is an area that we haven't particularly focused on over the last couple of years. So I'd say I would absolutely welcome, as I'm sure the other authorities would, to get that feedback about actually, are we doing enough? Is what we're providing making it, the right thing? And if not, what alternatives? And I think it's only through that feedback that we can then look about, well, how are we going to be in a position to fund that? So it's always going to be a question that we've got to consider. Whilst we would love to be able to respond to all the feedback and the recommendations of the user groups and carer groups, we do have to work within what resources we have. So that is a challenge. But absolutely, I'd welcome. I'm certainly looking forward to see what's coming out of the iCare board.
Hey?
Thank you.
I know that some people have had training, such as taxi drivers and bus drivers and things like that, how to deal with blind people and people with partially sighted and, with their guide dogs and things like this. Again, that's sort of in isolation, going from different authorities where the need is arisen. And I just wonder, couldn't best practice be written down somewhere as it's now for all citizens to think about all these things, from mental health, well-being to disabilities? Because there's some sections of society who don't know how to behave. And I know some of them will need specific training, but I'm sure if there was good practice about working together out there and some things that were well advertised, people might have more understanding in these areas.
And I think what there has been some good practice actually is with the national supermarkets and engagement with specific people being trained in the supermarkets to assist people who were visually or sight impaired or hearing impaired. I don't, if I'm honest, I don't particularly know about the Tesco's here, but I know about my local Tesco's in Newport because I know one of the staff that's been actually undertaken that training.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think probably we've got a role there of making sure the public are aware of that. Mm-hmm. That they can, those specifically trained staff are available in the supermarkets. Mm-hmm. So, sorry, that's only one very small area, but I absolutely agree with your point about how do we to gather that information and to share the best practice and not reinvent the wheel as well. Yeah. Mm.
Maybe have some points out there for the public so it's easily accessible, whether it's adverts, whether it's in a manual, whatever. But I think that's part of the problem, is there's lots of things going on in pockets and we don't do the joined up thinking.
No. And definitely feedback that comment to the IK board. When I spoke to the group in Blaenau Gwent, they had previously spoken to someone from Aviva Trains who had come into that group and spoken to them about using the trains, etc. And actually they'd gone on a trip to Cardiff and he had made sure that the train that they used, that the conductor and staff were all well aware that this group were going to come on to the train, etc. I thought it was fantastic, for Aviva, but like you said, how many people know about that? I suppose there's a role within the IK board to publicise that information.
Let's move on now to carers. I know you covered a little bit of this. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. The outcome indicator includes all adults and is not specific to carers. How will you make this specifically a measure for carers?
Okay, if you just give me a chance to have a look. Yeah, the carers section has been written by the carers board, and in terms of the actions, so it's this sorry, could you just remind me again? Are we talking about the outcome?
Page 41.
Indicator includes all adults and is not specific to carers. How will you make this specifically a measure for carers?
I'm looking to Helen for confirmation here, but where those indicators are split into carers as well. Sorry, under page 41, the percentage of adults who've received advice and assistance who have not contacted social services for 6 months, and I think when we report on that, it is the percentage of people who've had a carers assessment. It is a different. I think it's a sub yeah. I'll have to clarify. I have to go back to the wording, but from recollection, because it's part of the KPIs, that we have a subsection where we report on we report on the number of adults, but we report as a subsection is the number of carers. but I will clarify the wording for that, Stuart, and come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's a Welsh Government measure.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, we just go back to the wording.
It is.
But I'm quite sure, I reinforce what Jill said, I think there is a section for carers.
Come back in briefly, Chair. I'm particularly interested to know, I mean, we're talking about carers, and it may be thought that we're talking about adult carers, but as we all know, there are lots of young carers out there as well, so you disaggregate those figures, obviously.
Yes, yeah. There are measures for the split for young carers as well.
None of the activities within this section on carers appear to be focused on increasing public understanding. How will you achieve this, and how will you measure increased understanding and what impact this has for carers?
It's a good question, and one I'll take straight back to the Carers Board in terms of this is what consultation is about, really. And yes, if it is light on raising that sort of awareness, we'll take it straight back. Good point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last one, general. Paragraph 4.2
Can I just very quickly say that, again, it is one of the projects that there is a bid in for consideration for ICF this afternoon, but each of the local authorities certainly have been working with their appropriate carer centres, but we have acknowledged the need for an individual project officer to be making those connections and working with different groups and the communities to raise that awareness. So I'm hoping, because certainly that there is a bid in for Torvine for that person, I'm hoping that that's going to be supported this afternoon, and that certainly would be that part of that person's role is about raising awareness and looking around kind of maybe some media campaigns about what is available. So I can't confirm that, but I will hopefully be able to report that that's being supported following this afternoon's meeting. Sorry to interrupt then, Chair.
Nick?
Just a general question on carers. Do we actually have an accurate indication of the percentage of population in any or the area or in individual authorities as to who are carers and the numbers of it?
Again, it's a difficult one to measure because we offer maybe a professional view of a carer is different to the person who we see as a carer. When we offer a carer's assessment, we have quite a high percentage of people who decline that assessment because they do not see themselves as a carer. They are somebody's husband, somebody's wife, somebody's daughter, but don't see themselves as a carer. Whereas in a professional sense, given that the regular support that they are providing to their loved one, we would probably see them as a carer. So as far as the number of people we have registered as a local authority as a carer, who've had a carer's assessment, who have a support service in their own right as a carer and a review, the numbers, and I haven't got the numbers off the top of my head, but I'd say that they are not reflective of the number of carers we have in the borough, because we know, just from our day-to-day interaction with the people who are cared for, there's a huge amount of carers in Torvine, as there is nationally. So there's some figures nationally that gives you an estimated number, but when you look at the numbers reported from the local authority databases, there's a huge discrepancy, because, as I say, people do not see themselves as carers. So do we have an accurate reflection on our database? No. It's a very quick answer to that, but
just an obvious and perhaps supplementary to that. Are the plans in place to maybe to address that that specific issue for us to because obviously that's going to have a great impact when we are looking at the impact on the population as a whole. Are we looking to maybe to fill that lack of in-depth knowledge in that area?
we do report on, and again I'm looking for Helen for clarification, we do report on, we have a figure of where the number of carers assessments have been offered and that the percentage of those have been declined. So we do have an idea of actually where we've identified a carer. We've got that figure of kind of for those people who have declined that assessment. So that gives us a better indication. But what we haven't then got is that total number of actual carers. But we've got the number of assessments offered, which gives us a better picture, I would suggest. But those are for people who we are involved with, who are caring for their. We are providing some support for the person who's cared for, because we will offer. Anybody's entitled to a carer's assessment, so we don't have to be offering a service or providing a service. Anybody can present to us a social care and ask for a carer's assessment, and we will respond to that, irrespective of whether their cared for is having any services. But there is a huge gap there of people who don't receive services, and the carer doesn't approach social care. So there is that unknown across the whole of the UK. And I'd say that's where I think we try to use some of the national information to try and look at those trends, because from a local perspective, and I know you only know what you know, so we try and use some of the national research to kind of inform any of our responses.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, does that answer your question? It's a little bit long-winded, I appreciate that.
Well, yes, it does, and I think it really highlights one of the major problems that we have as a society, where the unseen carers provide so many of the services which perhaps we rely on as a society. And I think that sometimes we need to encourage people not to feel bad about being a carer, and to recognise that this is a very worthwhile role within life, and it's one to be applauded and recognised. And I think that if we can raise awareness around those areas, that as a community we can probably share the help around and share the burden a little bit more effectively. But without knowing the sort of numbers that we're talking about, it's quite difficult to actually target any help or to write a plan in that area. And I think maybe that's something, if you go back this afternoon to allocate some funds to, might be very, very worthwhile exercise maybe.
Whilst I can't give you the numbers, I can categorically say that tomorrow, if all the informal carers in Torvine decided that they weren't going to care for their loved one, we would absolutely collapse. And I'm absolutely 100% sure of that. Without the numbers, I mean, that is how much that we rely as a council really on the support that informal carers give.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I just ask then about young carers? Are we doing everything we can to support young carers and to give them that help and to identify them? And is that written into this wellbeing plan as well?
I can say from a local perspective that we do have a specific worker who just works with young carers, Nikki Isles, and she does some excellent work with the young carers on one-to-one group sessions, because that is all something about that peer support, social events, that she has a whole programme of work that Nikki provides just on a local basis. But from the regional plan, there's something that you want to add?
There's something, again my page numbers are different, but the Carers Board are taking forward some work around young carers, and in fact they commissioned a young carers ID card to help identify young carers, and that's actually a scheme that was picked up by Barnardo's, I think, and that's now going to be rolled out across the whole of Wales. So that was good practice, and there was also the rollout.
The ID card, the purpose of the ID card being?
It's I'll to go back and find out exactly what it is. I'm just reading what's in front of me because I'm trying to rack my brain.
From my understanding, it's about being able to access social activities or whatever without payment and things like that.
That's
just for
it,
clarification.
because there was also an ID card that idea proposed for a person, and young carers. Let's not just stop at under the age of 18, because I chatted to a young carer here in Torfaen who was 21 and was highlighting the difficulties she had in attending university in Pontypridd, and how that she would have to leave a lecture early because there was only one bus coming back to Torfaen, and that she needed to get home to support her mum, and then some of the sort of issues she faced with her lecturer, who just thought she was skipping out of a lecture. So again, there was that having that ID type card or that recognition of what young carers face there. And so, yes, I don't think it stops at 18 as well. We are looking at, obviously, people still within college, etc. But there's also the rollout of the Young Carers in Schools Award as well. And I think that's about the support of the staff and the school and the emphasis they place on young carers and recognition as well. But I can certainly find out some more information. It's just been it's a bullet point within the plan, but obviously there's a lot more detail behind it. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder would it be useful to this committee to know the number of young carers we have and the average ages of the young carers. As Phil pointed out, some go on well over 21, and all the implications that causes, like you say, at college, university. I just wanted to ask a general question now, Chair, and that's where are we in the rounds of the scrutiny compared to other authorities?
Well, it's certainly something we can go away and find out. It's probably not information contained within this area plan, and we haven't sort of delved down. But
Sorry, can I just clarify what your question? Are you saying where are we as far as this report being presented to scrutiny?
Yes.
For the second, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. The report has been presented to Caerphilly scrutiny, the Torfaen at the second, and then you have dates, I think, Phil, for
Blaenau Gwent's the week after next, and Monmouthshire Newport is just being finalised, yeah. But yeah.
Thank you. It's just for general information.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
General. Paragraph 4.2 of the report sets out what should be included in the plan. Can you explain how the plan satisfies each point?
Paragraph 4.2. Okay, these are the points raised, prescribed by Welsh Government. Yeah, would you like me to go through each bullet point? And yeah, so in terms of Welsh Government's requirement, the regional plan has to set out the priority areas for integration. In terms of integration, there is no definition set by Welsh Government around what integration is. But when we talk about integration, that could be things around pooled budgets, it could be around co-located teams, it could involve also integrated practices. Assessment, how we assess a person. There are different assessments that will take place across different agencies, across different local authorities, but we know people move between local authorities. So is the assessment that we complete for supporting people or families first in Blaenau Gwent compatible here with Torfaen? Because if a family moves from Blaenau Gwent into Torfaen, do we have to restart the whole assessment process again? Well, we would actually say no, and where the Act is trying to be different is portability, is to reduce the need that people have to tell their story to others and what have you. The same with social services. If a young person moves from Blaenau Gwent down to Newport, can that assessment follow them? So just to give you a flavour of what integration is, it could be around pool budget, co-located teams working together, but also integrated practices, such as whether it's assessment, but also workforce as well. Do the staff here in Families First have the same training as the Families First staff in Newport? And supporting people, the Flying Star, to social services, health board staff as well. But so that's an idea of what integration is. Pooled funds, that's a statutory requirement. There's a pooled fund around care homes that has to be developed across the region, and there's work taking place there. How services will be and that's set out within the plan. How services will be procured or arranged to deliver alternative delivery models. This is around social enterprises, and again there's a section within the plan setting out how we'll be working with a national organisation to look at how we, I'm not sure if we've got a target to set up a new number of initiatives, but that is very much support for cooperatives and social enterprises. The preventative services is laid out within the plan in section 2, as well as the actions that we've taken around the IIA. And then obviously the services through the medium of Welsh, that's a strand that we will look to take through, through the active offer, whether it's in local authority, to make sure that's replicated. So to satisfy the plan ourselves, really, we've had to demonstrate where in the plan we're taking forward each of those points. Some will be a lot more developed than others, granted. Okay.
Any more questions? I'd like to thank you very much for presenting your report.
And personally, I'd like to thank you. Consultation is about receiving comments, and there's been a number of comments today, but there's been some very helpful suggestions made and some comments, and there's a lot of stars next to comments today. In fact, it will help me, like I said, it will give me the opportunity now to go back to partners, whether it's the iCare board, the mental health partnership, and say, look, this has been raised by scrutiny. Can you now start giving this a bit more focus? So I'd like to thank you for that, and the area plan is going to be a lot stronger, a lot more effective document for the comments I've received today, so thank you.
Can I just ask, I've got a number of things that I know to feed back on, but may I just ask Councillor Evans, because there was one thing that you want me to feed back on, which was, and I didn't quite get it down, because there's a number of pupils who drop out, but I wasn't quite sure, the context. I just wanted to make sure that things I need to follow up on.
Yeah, what I was relating to there, Jill, was, as you say, the number of young people who drop out of school for various reasons, but most of them bordering on the mental issue side of it.
Okay, so do education have any information on people who are on non-attendance would be, because it'd be within the school?
Tutored at home.
Yeah. Okay, so the tutored at home. Okay, and what are the follow-up arrangements for those?
The reasons for why.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo your sentiments, really, Chair, about the information that we've had off Jill and Phil today, because I think a lot of us were a bit apprehensive about the report. A lot of it's been demystified now, and just happy to hear that you are considering putting another report for young people as well, and just to say thank you for all that information, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. As we said, easy reading.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Right. Recommendations, please.
And perhaps I'm stealing your thunder here, is it regarding the carers. We haven't got a definite figure. It's worrying for the comment that Jill made about if all the carers did suddenly join up and become officially carers, that we wouldn't be able to support them. But I do think we need to send a message out there to the number of carers and not officially carers to register as carers, because they're doing a very, very good job.
I think the point that she actually made was that if those people who were now officially registered as carers, if they stopped, we would be in problems rather than if people joined. I think the wider point that we were trying to make was that we haven't an idea or a proper idea of the level of care that is done, which is unrecognised. And I think that was the point, because we already know about those who have applied and those that have been taken on as official carers. That is, I think, I'm right in saying, it's quite well documented. But there is a great deal of care which is being done, which isn't recognised or recorded or understood. I think we all, or the greater public, actually understands that it's happening, but we can't quantify that, and until we can quantify it, we don't know what the need is. And I think that was the bigger issue, and maybe if we could have some work around that to try and quantify. I don't think we ever will do properly, but I think we need to be a lot more accurate in gauging the level of people who actually care, either formally or informally, because then we'll know the range of services that we need to support. And I think that was the point that we maybe need to find out. If everybody's happy with that.
All in favour? Yeah?
Yeah, I think you hit on a point where you said about engaging the community as well to raise awareness, and I think that needs to be within that as well.
Absolutely.
So I've quickly written down work to be done with engaging people who care informally and informally and raising awareness of the local community to the needs of those people. Are members happy with that?
I think to make it socially acceptable to be a carer, that there would be more recognition for the input that those people actually have within the community, and for it to not be an ununderstood terminology, because I think we're quick not to recognise things like that. The other thing for my two Pennyworth, I'm sorry, I don't want to, but the point that we made to get the report rewritten in English, that a wider range of people, and perhaps maybe as a first recommendation on that.
I've got there. Is everybody happy with the carers?
Yes.
Recommendation. And I've written down, revisit the document to ensure the public can access and understand the information provided in the regional plan, including all cohorts within the community.
One thing I would like to recommend, if the committee agree with me, is the urinate with the batteries. I know it's a very important thing, and I think, is there any possibility we get local pharmacies to issue them? Now, I had to go to the Royal Gwent to get mine. Then I found out they do them up in Blenavon, so I go to Blenavon, but it's still a bit of a trek for me, and I drive. If we could get sort of, if you could back me on this, we could get sort of local pharmacies or some local or centres to issue them. I'll agree on that. Mike?
If I can add to that, that some of the local GP practices are already actually doing an awful lot of that. I know from my, on my own case that my mother's GP, she goes there to have her INR, for the warfarin and things like that. So the services are already available on a more local basis, and I think that's maybe something that could be expanded. The capacity is there within the system to do it. I just don't think it's widely enough shared, or not enough people have taken that on board. And absolutely, it's and a lot of these things could be done.
Do you all agree on that one? Mike?
Yeah, I agree with that, because my hearing aid, I went to one supplier that said that I could get them from, and they refused me. So I buy my own now. I won't go to the Gwent because of the traffic and the parking down the Gwent. Neville Hall is a bit far, and I buy my own now. So I agree wholeheartedly with you that we should.
I think what would be better is if they were given a list of anybody local that does it, because I don't think you should be buying them. But Stuart?
Just going to say that I don't know what people think, that we support the initiative that Jill mentioned, and this committee supports it because it saves the transport and issues. We realise the problem about the demographics, because you can't have it done everywhere. It's got to be done reasonably, but I think I would support that initiative.
So I've got here, because that was part of the care closer to home, so instead of specifically saying hearing aids, we need to obviously think of wider services. So I've got consider the further development of the care closer to home to include services through local pharmacies, GP practices, to make those services more accessible to the communities they serve.
Yeah.
Any other recommendations? Faye?
I thought it was interesting when we were talking about the well-being of children that they were going to capture good practice from different places and try to roll it out across the country. And I wondered about more collaborative working between social services, the third sector and education.
Yeah, I'd go along with that.
Could that be a more general point? Could that be a more general point, from the previous point? This issue of good practice that's happening across all of the partnerships to be captured centrally and then applied outwards, maybe.
Shared best practice, would be.
Share best practice across the.
Any other recommendations? Joe?
More of a suggestion, really, going back to the young carers and how to engage with those particularly young carers who aren't coming forward as formal carers, is maybe have an award for them. So that would encourage people to come forward as carers and give the recognition and raise their profile.
Just say, I think that is happening in schools already, but perhaps it needs to be out in the county as well, not just in schools, in lots of different areas. The Young Carers Award could be grown on, couldn't it? Not just belong to education and to schools.
Okay, noted. I've got.
Okay.
Stuart?
Can we mention something in there about the loneliness and isolation of people? It's cropping up all too often now that people are isolated and lonely, and that leads to all kinds of problems. Is there anything that we can do there in our recommendations to highlight that?
I think there's the priority was around improving outcomes for older people by reducing isolation. So maybe they should be measuring that specifically. But I think there's a more general recommendation around the measures, because you questioned quite a bit about measures, about looking at the measures they're suggesting they use and making sure they actually link to the outcome, because some of them they didn't really link and you didn't really understand why the measures were there. So I think there is a more general recommendation to be made around the selection of measures. Would you agree with that?
I wondered again if we could capture the best practices in other authorities, how they're dealing with it.
Sue?
Also, with the discussion with forums, especially within Withershams and 3 other centres within Torfaen, I didn't hear anything mentioned, talking to the elder generation, of visiting complexes. We have quite a few in Torfaen. Do we have people in the complexes that's feeling lonely, that need someone to talk to? Have we looked at that? Has anyone looked at it? When you're thinking of well-being, loneliness, there was no mention of any of the authorities visiting complexes. And the age there is 55 upwards?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah?
Yeah. Could I just add to that there is good practice going on in some of our 55 plus residencies. I regularly go to the beaches in our constituents, and they support each other. There's some great work going on there, where one lady who has cancer has other ladies going to stay in her room every night from the same complex, and actually people from other complexes come to the beaches for support and to have activities and to go out on trips. So there's an example of best practice which could be shared across our authority, and possibly, you know, somewhere written up to look at what they do, how they do it, and to transfer it on to other authorities.
Yeah, I'll support that one. Nick?
One of the things which isn't necessarily perhaps covered by this report, but in general, we haven't discussed any of the infrastructure that we may have in place, you know, within the authority. We have an issue of people being able to get to places, and this will have an impact on people, even if it's just getting down to the Gwent to pick up batteries and these sort of things, but even locally to get to from Pontypool to Cwmbran. And so much of this, if we're actually going to be talking about the well-being of population, should they be looking at infrastructure, you know, within the, you know, bus links, being able to travel for communities to be able to get together? Are we looking at isolation that's actually being caused by lack of public transport? Being able to get anywhere on public transport at the moment is always a problem, especially if we are now looking at potentially an ageing population, where perhaps a bigger percentage of our population may be no longer able to drive as they used to. You know, it's an issue that we haven't looked at fully, I don't believe. And whether it's within the context of this, I'm not quite sure. But certainly, if we are going to be looking about the well-being of people in the longer term, because I understand this is a longer-term report, that maybe we should be starting to look at some of those issues around how do communities get together, how do they interact, how does Blenavon talk to Pontypool, how does it talk to Cwmbran, how does it relate with the wider community to be able to get to Newport and to Abergavenny. And especially if we're looking at the Iron Bevan Health Board, we're almost looking at getting into Caerphilly and sort of places for Ystrad Mynach, you know, with other hospitals. You know, it's a big problem if people need to travel to hospitals and things like this. Maybe there should be a small piece of work put in there to look at the infrastructure within the borough to how do the people get to these places.
I would certainly endorse that, because in the north of the borough, to get to Neville Hall Hospital, you have to catch 2 buses. You have to go to Brynmawr first, and then from Brynmawr down, and then coming back, the Brynmawr service is on an hourly basis. It's a real problem, so I would definitely support that.
On a wider point, even to get from Cwmbran, you have to either catch the train or a bus into Abergavenny bus station, and then a separate bus. And if you're going on the train, you cannot get from the train to the hospital unless you take a taxi, which is expensive. So there are major problems. Either that, or you have to, as you quite rightly say, get a bus from Cwmbran to Blenavon and catch the Merthyr bus down to Abergavenny. It's a big problem, actually.
And likewise, when you go to Ebervale, there's 2 buses there to get to the Ystrad Mynach and what have you, which a lot more people are going there now. They seem to be going there to convalesce, operations and such, but it is a problem. I'm glad you've recognised it.
The problem being with that is a lot of subsidies have been taken off bus firms, and whereas in mid-Wales you've got a lot of little minibuses running around, and sometimes the postman will take people, and it's just around this area that the subsidies have gone and local bus firms are not engaging. It's just not economical.
Coupled with that is low ownership of cars, you know.
I agree with you entirely, but I don't know where we go with that one. I'll support it.
I think on that sort of issue, if you just look at the differences in fares with Newport bus service, because it's actually cheaper to use Newport bus service to travel from Cwmbran to Newport than it is to use Cwmbran bus services to go in between. And from a wider point of travel, Zone 1, Zone 2 in Newport is no more than £4 return. And you can get pretty much anywhere within the county on that. To use a similar service within Cwmbran will cost you nearly twice that. And that can't be just down entirely to subsidies. There must be something, a little bit more connected with that. Maybe this is not part of this this report, but generally the connectivity of communities is something for the future, definitely.
The main thing with that is that with the buses and things is the lack of use, because I think we're going off track here, because when I live on the Garn, you've got buses every 10 minutes and they stack up, and there's hardly anybody. I think it's from Cwmbran to Newport to Pontypool is where the people are, but from there on there's just nobody on the buses. That's from, they can't, no.
I think...
yeah. But the only good thing about it is, though, Nick, is that the pensioners do get free travel. And there's a lot of them, they just use it to go out. And I've talked to people, we go down to Barry and take a coach down, and there's people down there say, God, what are you doing on here? I had free bus travel. And they just go out to get out to meet people. I know one person that's staying on a bus all day, and you go different ends just to talk to people. This loneliness.
So, for that recommendation, I've got to consider looking at the isolation caused around the infrastructure, or look at the infrastructure when considering isolation and general well-being, including access to public transport, the way communities interact between each other, and looking at the infrastructure to enable these communities to interact with each other. So, okay, yeah.
Anything else? Right, well, hello, Faye.
I was just wondering, I know he's written it down when he was talking to us, but to understand more about well-being and health, could they look at questionnaires in CAMS for parents, carers, staff and young people? Because that seemed to be an area they didn't have a lot of information on.
Got that one, Helen?
Yeah. One point that was mentioned quite early on in your discussions was about the annual report. I think you were, Councillor Evans, keen for them to bring the annual report back to scrutiny, and also the performance framework that sits alongside the plan. Yeah.
Chair, I wondered if we just have a recap of the recommendations we've made. I think it's 5, is it? Or is it 6?
Right, so consider bringing the annual report to scrutiny, along with the performance report. Revisit the document to ensure the public can access and understand the information provided. That's the easy read and including the young carers. Engaging people who care formally and informally, and make it socially acceptable to be a carer. So there's no misunderstanding about the terminology. Consider the development of the care closer to home, to include services being provided by local pharmacies, GP practices, to make services more accessible to those in the community that they serve. I can't read my writing. Good practice, existing good practices across each of the boroughs and health service to be communicated across the partnership and to be recognised. Develop a Young Carers Award, and some a general recommendation about making sure measures actually measure the outcomes, or the stated outcomes. Consider looking isolation and general well-being caused by the inability to access public transport. I think that's an extension of the infrastructure.
Okay. Date of the next meeting is the 29th of March. Vanguard. Progress made in implementing the new way of working in the Torfaen Wellbeing Team. Meeting over.
Outcomes of the recommendations.
Sure, I got your point.
Somerset.
Somerset.
Oh my God. Ta-ra all.
I know.